Good afternoon. So I stand before you as a somewhat, I still like to think I'm an outsider to this industry, even though I've been trying to sell to hotels, trying to sell technology to hotels for about 15 years. But I think there's a part of me that still thinks that this industry grudges innovation. It's mostly, in the last 10 years or 15 years, if you look at it, innovation in this industry has come from the outside. It has very rarely come from within. So hold on a second before I move on. I need the thing to move my slides. Sorry. Do you have the, thank you. Green, right? Sorry. So before I sort of go on, let me just tell you a little bit of a personal story. For the first 5 or 6 years, when I tried to sell technology into this industry, everyone thought about the PMS, and their world revolved around the PMS. And they were starting to wake up to this thing called Expedia, and then slowly this thing called Booking.com. But they still hadn't quite figured out how badly the business model was going to be disrupted by not just them, but a number of other technology players who would emerge, who a lot of us talk about today. So if we look at it today, and we look at some trends that are going on around us, I think the question all of us have to keep in mind is, are we really observing these trends and figuring out what we can do? And figuring out, if we extrapolate from some of them, what is going to happen 5 or 7 years from now? I don't see enough of that happening even today. This is an industry, and I think a lot of you probably use a PMS, whose name I'm sure you can guess. That is probably you probably curse it 10 times a day. But it exists in its position because you got it there and you didn't do anything about it. Because you couldn't think of what actually it would take to build an alternative, and the dependency just grew and grew and grew. It's the same thing with the OTAs. So what I'd like you to do is sort of open your minds up a little bit, and I'm going to try and throw a couple of ideas in the next 10 or 15 minutes as to what it might look like in the future. And I think the future is going to be determined by all of us in this room and our colleagues around the world in similar roles. Whenever we think about the future, or when we used to think about the future, right, we would think about flying cars, for those of you who remember the Michael J. Fox movie Back to the Future, back in the day. Bureau of Future Crime in Minority Report, killer androids, etc. Science fiction made it seem like it was really far away. But a lot of us in this room can think back 10 years and realize that it actually goes pretty fast, right? So today, we live in the future of, let's say, 2006, right? What was going on in 2006? That was what a hotel website looked like, right? Some of you are laughing at it. Absolutely. I don't think you'd spend a minute on that website, right? That was what Booking.com looked like back in 2006. There was no mobile app, right? In fact, there was no iPhone either. There was no iPad either, right? That's what Priceline looked like. Eventually died out. And Facebook was an emerging company. Some of you may have already opened up accounts on Facebook back then. It was worth $500 million. It was privately funded. It's worth about $500 billion today, right? That's about 100 times the value. Which other actually more than 100 times, it's about 1,000 times the value. Which hotel company has grown 1,000 times in value in that same time period? It's not a hotel company yet, right? So look at Apple. It was iPod. It was everything iPod, right? And it was worth 40-something billion dollars. It's worth 900 billion today. Netflix was a DVD distribution business. The concept of streaming movies through the internet was just starting to emerge. And who could have imagined that this company is going to transform itself with technology into something that occupies hours of time of every adult in certain countries, actually, or a majority of adults, right? It's your default go-to option when you have nothing else to do. Google, of course, had already become a major player back in 2006, but in spite of us knowing the power of Google then, could any of us have imagined that Google would slowly, in very insidious ways, actually make more money from hospitality than most hospitality players? And Amazon, of course, all of you know the story. The point is, these companies, which were little blips on your radar back then, have added about $3 trillion of value in the last decade, a little over a decade, right? Smartphones were just starting to emerge back then. Today, this year, 1.6 billion smartphones are going to be sold on the planet, right? That is an enormous number. I was with a friend the other day who makes smartphones for some of the manufacturers, and his company has just grown leaps and bounds as an outsourced manufacturer of smartphones, right? So he's sort of an equivalent of a Foxconn. And the rate at which people seem to be replacing their phones is shocking. So it's sort of, I don't even know what to compare it to today, but, and with all the software that then goes on the phones, the opportunity to own, it's not share of screen, it's share of mind. What is on the first screen of that phone is what people are spending their mind share on, right? I don't think there's a single hotel app that sits anywhere on that first screen for most people in the world. So the point is, the signs are here. We've got to start looking at some of them, right? So Internet of Things, a lot of us talk about it. We hear about it. People tell us about it. But are we actually making our buildings compatible in any way with IoT? Are any of us, when we're speccing out new builds, even thinking about what we should put in just to future-proof it? Technology will come. Software will come. I met a French entrepreneur just 2 days ago. He was looking for investment opportunities in India. The guy has built a complete stack. He's a listed company in Paris, 400 million euros in market cap in only 2 years. He has built a whole stack for anybody to be able to build software to power IoT devices on his platform. So he's built the entire tool set, which already has interfaces to most of the major hardware manufacturers. I haven't heard that from a single hotelier whose business it is, I would think, to actually understand this technology and start to build around it. A lot of us talk about robots. There are hotels in the world who started interfacing and installing robots. There are hotels that are in Singapore, not very far away from here, using robots to clean banquet halls, for example, fairly straightforward rooms, some to clean corridors. There are robots that are around to also deliver items that guests order and take them straight up to the room, right? Some of you may have even come across these devices. Of course, they're still a little bit clunky. They're difficult to integrate to. There's a little bit of a setup pain that's required, but guess what? Human resources has no trouble with them. They don't leave you, right? They don't ask for vacation, okay? So if you actually look at the all-in cost, it's actually quite cheap, right? We just got a request to interface our software to one of these providers, and makes complete sense. So here's how it would work. Somebody would maybe call down, ask the operator punches into a system like ours, and automatically the robot goes and delivers it. The next stage of this is the person just texts our system, and it goes directly to the robot, and the robot delivers it, right? So it knows where to pick it up from. It goes there, beeps the person. He puts in, let's say, hand towels, goes to the elevator. It's programmed for the elevator doors to open, goes in, goes to your room, and returns to base, right? This stuff's real. It's happening already. We've all heard about Tesla. We've heard about driverless cars. We've heard about Google's project. All of this is real. All of this is happening. You can actually take a drive in certain parts of the world. You can get into a car, and it can deliver you to your destination without a driver. So we'll see this happening. It's fairly real. It's imminent. We are all, I think a lot of us may already have bought Google Home devices or Android Alexa devices and so on. This stuff is real. So think about it, right? How difficult is it today for technology to essentially be voice-driven, for your entire guest experience to be voice-driven with technology, all the way from the start, where you're searching for a room, through to actually checking in at the hotel and reaching your room, right? So theoretically, you could call in or from your phone, have a chatbot or a chatting service driven by technology respond to you, ask for hotels with certain specifications. It asks you clarification questions, and then that gives you a bunch of options. And based on your past history, maybe it already knows what to auto-suggest, right? So it knows your likes and dislikes. So it gets better and better with time, a little bit like Siri or some of the other voice activation technologies. And then it makes the booking. It already knows your credit card. Otherwise, once you read it out, if you're using it first time, it stores that. And then closer to time, when you're about to get to the hotel, you can inform it what time, you can inform the service what time you're going to arrive at the hotel. You don't even need a key to get into the hotel room, because guess what? It's going to recognize your face, because that is the face that your device took the picture of when you were actually making the booking. And it's going to go in and it's going to allow you to open the door lock and check in and go into your room. There is no check-in process. Yeah, there might be a meet and greet process, but why should you have something called check-in? What is the requirement for this thing called check-in? So as an outsider, this is one of my outsider moments, right? There's not a single hotelier, apart from certain very restrictive jurisdictions where you do have police requirements, et cetera, who has been explained to me why on earth you want to check in. It's like, oh, I need to know when the guest is there. Why do you need to know when the guest is there? Have a little IoT device in the room that tells you that somebody's walked into the room, right? Do you really need to know when the guy comes in? What for? And there are hotels in the world now that are perhaps not 5-star in level and in service that are starting to adopt that model, because they have fundamentally questioned, what is this thing called check-in? And by the way, what is this thing called 3 o'clock check-in and 12 o'clock checkout? Why on earth do I need to have that? If I'm leasing space, why can't I lease it on an hourly basis? Why do I have to make the unit of sale a night, right? So switching gears a little bit, I'm sure a lot of you read about Bitcoin last year. Why did you read about it? Because it was in the headlines every day. Why was it in the headlines every day? Because it was growing at some crazy percentage in value every day. And the interesting thing is, of course, there's jury's still out on whether or not this stuff's here to stay. But if you think about it for a moment, do any of you know how long the system that we currently use, this cash-based and banking system that we are so dependent on, that we trust, has been in existence for? It's only been around for 70 years. Since around the Second World War, so 80 years. It's not older than that. And that entire system, which was based on the gold standard, was disrupted in 1971 when America started to print whatever money it needed to bridge the fiscal deficit. And after that, every country dropped the gold standard, so we went to something called fiscal imprudence, right? And the governments were empowered to print whatever money they needed to spend, right? Which led to inflation and hyperinflation and so on. But the point is, this system is controlled by governments, and hence, it's flawed. So today, the only reason I accept money and you accept my money is because there is a trust that the next person you transact with is going to accept that money. It's not very far away, therefore, to conceive that if you accept my Bitcoin and then you accept his Bitcoin, it's going to become a trusted means of exchange, and very quickly, we will start using that. The first Bitcoin transaction happened at about 3 cents, beg your pardon. The original Bitcoin value was a fraction of a cent, right? Bitcoin started only in 2009. Its price today, I think, was about $7,900 this morning. But if we look at the history of Bitcoin and you divide it up, you see 4 clear phases. And in every single phase, it's gone up by many hundreds of %. And then when that phase has passed or has come to an end, it's dropped down to about half the value. But then it plateaus at that. So it sort of does a climb, comes back to a new level, and then does another climb a year later. And it's gone through 4 such phases. So I'd say it's a fair bet that Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a couple of the other more reliable cryptocurrencies are actually probably here to stay. And there are enough legitimate investors who have put so much money into these that I think some of them are probably getting to the point where they are too big to fail. The point is, it's happening. And I would bet that by 2050, money as we know it and cash as we know it is probably going to disappear. What do we call a hotel? Is it a place to sleep a night? Is it a place to have a fine dining experience? Is it a place to socialize? I think the definitions are getting blurred. And we were talking, the previous Q&A session was talking about Airbnb. Absolutely. It is one of the things that is blurring the definition of what a hotel really is. And therefore, as hoteliers, what is our industry? Is it a block with rooms and F&B and a spa? So people like WeWork have been experimenting with, in the office space, of course, they've changed the paradigm quite a bit as to how real estate is monetized for commercial real estate. And they're now starting to experiment with something called WeLive, where they're mixing shared office spaces with shared living spaces, which definitely work really well for a certain segment of the population. There's something called Zoku in Amsterdam. And one of my favorite examples is an entrepreneur, is a young hotelier in London who has started a brand called Hoxton, which the lobby area is like this buzzing community of mostly youngsters, sipping coffee all day and probably spending, I don't know, $5 or $10 in the whole day, but they get high-speed Wi-Fi. But it becomes this massive community sort of feeling. So when you go in there, you really feel like you're part of something. And to the point that the gentleman from Fraser's made right before me, it's about how much of the real estate is actually being used for monetizing from a room night perspective. They monetize more than 80% of their real estate. It's only the ground floor that's used for this F&B. They don't waste any other space on this. But this ground floor helps them attract so many guests to the hotel. And their rooms, I think the maxi room is like 18 square meters. So it's a really tiny room. But their yield per square foot or square meter, however you measure it, is massive. It's higher than most of the five-star hotels in London. Distribution will continue to get disrupted in the future. I think even today, of course, we talk about the big OTAs like Booking.com, but new OTAs will emerge. There is no reason why large payment companies like Paytm in India or Alibaba in China or Alipay, they're not going to become distributors of hotel, right? I think the gentleman from Make My Trip is going to be here this afternoon as well. He's going to be competing with the Flipkarts of this world who are today selling all sorts of stuff like Amazon, and Amazon is going to be competing with Booking.com. There's been a lot of talk, of course, so I don't have any more facts than you guys would, but it's not inconceivable that if you have such a large segment of population as your customer, it is not very difficult for you to add more products to sell to them. So there is no reason why they will not be there to disrupt even further. And you've got to understand that as the hotel industry, what's happening is that these people who control the consumer are sort of dominating completely hoteliers who have not understood technology adequately enough to put up a strong defense and to have their own channels through which they distribute. No surprises on this. You mentioned it already. I think if you extrapolate just the way that these companies are growing, Airbnb is probably going to be far bigger than any hotel company by 2030, right? Of course, there's going to be missteps. Of course, there's going to be regulatory challenges. But hey, there have always been regulatory challenges whenever any industry has been disrupted. That's never gone away. Okay, I'm going to skip past a few of these slides just in the interest of time and get to a couple of others. So 126 million Chinese tourists are going to go abroad. How many of your hotels communicate on WeChat with Chinese tourists today? Or even use WeChat as a payment mechanism? There's 100 million Indian tourists who are going to be traveling abroad. Are any of you even thinking about tying up with some of the large dominant Indian payment platforms. Millennials are everywhere, but they want to buy experiences. They want to go the Viator way, right? How many of you have even heard of Viator? TripAdvisor bought it for a lot of money 2 years ago, right? And it is completely changing the way that that a lot of these people travel because it curates the whole experience, right? Let's talk about blockchain for just a minute. I'm going to run over time. So one of my favorite points, I think, to hoteliers is to say, we think of selling room nights, and we think of these room nights as a unique transaction, like I can only sell it to you, the ultimate user. But name me another industry in which I will only sell what I sell directly to the end consumer of that good or service, right? It generally doesn't exist. There is in most industries a perfect mechanism to transact this through multiple stages because what it does is it makes markets more efficient. So there is no reason why I can't take room 402 on March 2 and sell that to a trader. And blockchain lets you do that, right? That trader sells it to another trader who sells it to somebody else. And then based on demand and supply forces, the night before or a few hours before the check-in time, somebody is actually going to be assigning a name to that booking, and that person will arrive at your hotel, right? And what does it do for the hotelier? Well, it brings the money in advance, so you know exactly what you've sold it for. There is predictability to revenue. And there's, of course, traders who make the market very efficient, so much like stocks or bonds or oil or other commodities, right? OK, so I guess the point is, I think it's very important to keep our eyes and our minds open. There's somebody who said this a long time ago. He was actually the chairman of IBM, right? He thought the world market was only going to be 5 computers. I guess he was disproven. So let's not ignore the signs that are out there, and let's think progressively. Thank you. Do I have time for questions? No? OK. Sorry, I don't have time for questions.